Hi, guys, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Danny, as always. And in today's episode, I thought I'd do a little bit of a chatty solo podcast with an update on where I'm at personally on the training front and a little bit of a rundown on the last few months as well, because I remember I previously mentioned training for Hyrox, which was going ahead. I was really excited for it, but I ended up pulling out because of life circumstances at the time. And I wanted to kind of like summarize some of that, share some learnings from the past few months as well from a training perspective, and just chat about my experiences and also cover the 10K that I ran this Saturday just gone as well, because I think that there'll be some really helpful insights to share with you. And I know that some of you just like keeping up to date with what I'm up to on the training front as well. So the last few months in November, I think it was, I ran a half marathon in Tatton, which all of my races so far have been at Tatton. It's just a really nice, like really good venue, great for parking. I lived in Manchester for a couple of years, so I have friends close by and really like the routes that are there as well. So it's not really been on purpose that I've raced at Tatton every single time, but I guess it's kind of I gravitate towards it because I know that it's a safe bet and I know that it's a good course. The parking's decent and I have friends in the area, so it's just ended up falling that I've raced at Tatton every single time. But the half marathon, the first half marathon I ran at Tatton a couple of years ago was an amazing experience. The one in November was not an enjoyable experience at all because of me being really sick. I started coming down with something the night before and it completely knocked me for six. The second half of the half marathon, every single step felt like a fight. It was horrendous. And it really sort of knocked my confidence with training a little bit and kind of took me back to a time where during bodybuilding, pushing the extremes really took a toll on my health in terms of my menstrual cycle function and injuries and just not feeling good in my body. And although after the half marathon, it wasn't like I didn't have irregular cycles or anything like that, nothing like that happened, but I I felt I've never been so ill actually. I don't think in my life it was the worst virus I've ever had, to the point that my mum was talking about calling A&E because I was that bad. But anyway, long story short, was very, very, very sick after the half marathon we ran in November. And it just really threw me. And I was almost hesitant to get back into training because I was scared of pushing myself again and ending up back in a position where I was sick or I was unable to, function well. I'm a person who really likes to perform well, not just physically, but mentally as well. My work really matters to me. My business really mattered to me. I don't like having to take time away from it because of being sick or because of being injured or whatever. So, yeah, I was almost hesitant to get back into training. I was scared of pushing it again. I was scared of getting sick again. And I hate taking time away from my life and being able to, see friends and family and really live my life. So it just really knocked me. And I was really scared of my health taking a hit again. And I was almost scared that because I was so sick with the virus, that that would have potential consequences from like a menstrual cycle function perspective and things like that, because I have found in the past that my cycle, I guess when this has happened, it's been closer to the time where I competed in bodybuilding, so it's not been recent, but in the past years ago, I found that any little stressor would impact my menstrual cycle regularity. So if, for example, I went on a long haul flight or I got sick, I'd find that my cycle would become irregular following that, and that used to throw me off a little bit. So I was nervous for that happening, which luckily, touch wood, it didn't. And I've been fine. And I do think that must be related to the fact that it has been longer post that time competing in bodybuilding now, where my body has been in a really well fed, well looked after, well nourished state, as opposed to pushing those extremes and underfueling. and trying to get as lean as physically possible. So I think that time away from bodybuilding has done me good and has made my body more resilient and has meant that my health is in a better spot on the whole. So I'm really thankful for that. But you do still have, and I've spoken to clients about this as well, who feel the same way. You still almost have this underlying fear that you're going to end up back in a position of poor health and you're going to end up sacrificing things like your fertility, your general hormone health, the way that you feel, perform, and function on a regular basis. And that can be quite scary. So yeah, at times where my health really takes a hit, it does shake me a little bit, and it takes me a while to get back to a point where I feel capable of really pushing my training again. So I did build back quite gradually after the half marathon experience not being very good and my health being in the trash essentially. And then I started training for a Hyrox, which was supposed to be in January in Manchester with my friend Lauren, and I was really looking forward to it. However, what then happened was my nan fell really ill with cancer and we were caring for her. I was traveling back and forth between Leeds and Sheffield. She's in Sheffield, I'm in Leeds at the moment. And it was a lot to fit in. And it was also very, you'll know if you've ever cared for anyone, if you listen to this podcast, it's very taxing. Obviously, I would be there for her in a heartbeat. And I had no problems with doing that, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it is very taxing mentally and physically. And I just didn't have the capacity to train how I might have wanted to during that time to, train with as much structure as maybe I needed to train Pyrox. And I didn't have the capacity to train with the intensity that I needed to start pushing closer to the race. And I also didn't want to let my Hyrox partner down and risk having to bail last minute because the when it started to approach race day, my nan was really deteriorating and we didn't know when it was going to be her sort of last few days. So I didn't want to risk having to bail on my partner. So I backed out of the Hyrox in order to prioritize being with my family, being able to care for my nan, being able to visit her when she was eventually in St. Luke's. And so yeah, backed out of the Hyrox even though I was really excited for it. And then what did happen during that time, which I'm really proud of, and I guess is something that I'm quite proud of on the whole in terms of my approach to training, is that although I didn't train with the structure and intensity that I had planned, I did still continue to train consistently, which allowed me to maintain a really good level of fitness. I was still running at least twice a week, every week. I was still getting in the gym maybe twice a week, each week. Again, yes, sometimes intensity was lower than what it might have needed to be if I was doing high rocks and needed to build that up close to race day. But I was still showing up consistently, and that enabled me to maintain that really good level of fitness and to not completely feel like I was starting again when that, difficult period of time passed. So I kind of thank myself for that and I give myself a big pat on the back for that. That is something that I'm quite proud of. And so training sort of been ticking over since then. And recently I have started to push my intensity in my running a little bit and decided a few weeks ago to enter Tatton 10K. I did Tatton 10K last year in April, loved the course, loved the race, had a really fun time, hit a PB. And so I thought, why not do another one now? Running has been going quite well. I did reckon I could probably beat what I ran last year. And even if I didn't, to be honest, I was like, it gets a race under my belt. Hopefully, it would be a more positive experience for me than the last race that I did, the half marathon where I felt really sick. And I knew that would give me a bit more of like a positive association with racing again, which I definitely felt like I needed. So I'm actually, something that I think is important to mention is that I'm enjoying entering, say, a race or a fitness competition a little bit closer to the time where possible at the moment. It's a shame that you can't do it more easily because there are competitions like Hyrox, for example, that sell out so far in advance. But I do enjoy being able to enter where possible, say a few weeks out, and just do it. rather than there being this massive, long, drawn out preparation phase for a race that for me, I find the pressure builds during that time. So I prefer to kind of enter closer to the time. And it's not that I'm not training for the race because my training is always consistent. So it's not like I'm risking injury or anything like that. I'd never, for example, me now, I haven't been running really longer than 12K. I wouldn't jump into a half marathon right now. I'd make sure that my distance was greater if I wanted to do that. So it's not that I'm not training properly, I am. But in terms of actually entering the competition, I'm finding that I'm favouring entering a little bit close to the time if it's possible, just because it removes that pressure and it feels more fun for me personally. And I have, like I said, been feeling really strong on my runs this last month or so, I guess. Other than one where I had stomach issues because the day before I had a few mojitos and very different nutrition. So I knew why that was. So yeah, even though my training hasn't been as structured, I knew that I should have a relatively good performance in me for this 10K that I've just ran. And I did it in just over 48 minutes last year when I was aiming for under 50. So I knew that anything quicker than that, I would have been elated with. And even to be honest, if I didn't run it in that, I think I just needed that positive race experience and I would have been over the moon regardless. So I did end up having a really positive day. I did end up hitting a PB. My chip time was 47:09 and on Strava it was 46:12. And that actually put me sixth in my age group and 15th out of all of the women on the day. I'll actually get it up because I took a picture earlier of how many people actually entered the race. So it was quite a high number. So that was out of in gender. So I was 14th out of 440. And in my category, I was sixth out of 230 people. So I was really, really happy with that. And even regardless of where I stood against other people, I was just really proud of myself for beating last year's time and for just having a really positive experience and staying consistent through a period of life where it would have been very easy to just sack it off completely. So, really, really happy with that. And one thing I was also really proud of is not just my overall time, but my pacing. So I started quite steady and finished very strong at the end of the race. And I progressively, other than there was a long stretch, which was an incline, I think between around like 5 and 7K, during that stretch, I think I pretty much held my pace, maybe dropped off a little bit, but obviously that's understandable given the incline. But other than that, I progressively got faster throughout the race. So what that tells me is I paced myself really well rather than starting too quickly and then having to pull back or falling off throughout the race, or even worse, crashing and burning and not finishing, because that is a mistake that a lot of people make. And what I generally advise most of my clients when it comes to race day is to start steady, start slow, because there is such a big temptation to go off like a bullet when you've got the adrenaline, when you've got the pressure, when you're excited, and when you also feel fresh at the start of a race. But that's what usually kills people. And we actually generally perform a lot better if we pace ourselves at the start and we're able to grow into a race. We're able to get quicker. And we don't, especially when it comes to half marathons and marathons, those longer distances, we don't want to start too fast because if we start too fast, we are going to get to a point where we just can't carry on running. We can't sustain that pace. We really drop off the face of a cliff. And that's where people don't achieve the times that they wanted essentially. So you've got to kind of keep your ego in check, I guess, at the start of a race. It's so important to do that, but it is so hard to do that. It's looking at that evidence of like even myself, I can look through my Strava and all of the runs that I have been the most proud of, that I've achieved PBs, that I've achieved my quickest runs, my most successful runs. They've all been where I've kept my ego in check at the start of the run and started nice and steady, or allowed myself to warm up really thoroughly before before kind of like letting my pace speed up too much because we can't sustain those quick paces over long periods of time. So it's so important to keep your ego in check. And what I also found is that where most people struggled on inclines, I actually felt really strong. It's the place where I overtook the most people was on inclines and hills. And I do think that is largely because I do have quite strong legs and resistance training is something that I'm really consistent with. Whereas I know a lot of runners do sometimes end up neglecting their gym-based sessions. And that might be where they struggle with that element of a race potentially, or they're not pacing themselves properly and other things. But I did notice that that was a situation where I was quite strong. And also, what will have lent itself well to that is that I do run on inclines in training. I do run often undulating courses, or when I'm in Sheffield, there's huge hills, as a lot of you listening to this podcast will know. So I'm very used to hills. I don't shy away from them in my training. So if you're someone who is wanting to do a race of any kind and you know that there's going to be inclines involved in that, make sure that you're including them in your training because it will prepare you for that. It will get you good at them. Don't shy away from them because it will then hit you like a ton of bricks, essentially. And pre-race nutrition for anyone interested, because sometimes people ask this kind of thing, is I actually ended up having two slices of toast. One was with peanut butter and honey, and one was with peanut butter and jam. The most important thing with pre-race nutrition is that it's food you're familiar with. It's food that you've had before your runs in the past, and toast is something that I've had before a lot of my runs in the past. I don't personally have protein in my pre-race breakfast because it takes longer to digest and absorb, and it's not really something that's going to fuel our race. And I don't generally have it before like long runs either. I'll have it afterwards instead. Because, like I said, it's not really going to contribute to fueling that performance. So, yeah, mainly just I had two slices of toast, peanut butter and honey, peanut butter and jam, tastes good, carbs, fats, good mixture there. And then I also had an electrolyte tablet as well in the morning. And I took a banana with me to have half an hour before the race, but I didn't actually end up having it. I just felt pretty good and really well fueled, so I didn't end up having that. Although I would usually do that, and if it was a longer distance, to say it was a half marathon or a marathon, I would have made sure to make that essential. But with it being a 10K, I knew that I was adequately fueled for that distance anyway, so it wasn't an absolutely essential thing, and I felt pretty good going into that race, so I didn't end up having the banana there. I didn't carry water or gels with me either, with it being a 10K, but I did grab water from a water station halfway and just had a sip of it. I didn't like stop and have much, just literally grabbed it and threw it in my mouth and threw it away. Literally had one sip, just because I didn't want to disturb my groove. I was in a really good groove. Pace was really good. I was holding it well, felt really confident, really strong. So I didn't want to stop and have water there. It wasn't really necessary with it being a 10K. If it was again a greater distance like a half marathon or a marathon, I would have made sure to have either taken liquid with me to drink throughout, or I would get some from a water station and have more of it than I had on that day. And with it, if it was a longer distance, I would have also made sure to have gels with me as well, like I've done for the half marathons that I've done in the past. But the 10K distance, you can do without gels and without carrying water as well. And I find it just makes me feel a little bit lighter, less of a distraction. Sometimes when I'm wearing my running belt or a vest, it irritates me that it's like on me. I don't know how to explain it, but it irritates me if it's like bouncing around a little bit, or if I can just feel the sensation of it on me, or it feels heavy. So on a 10K, I like to race without it. Simple as that. And then post race, fueled really well, ate plenty of food, had a nap on the sofa in the afternoon. That was lovely. Rested from training the day after the race, which I would recommend most people do in most circumstances after a race or competition, and had a roast dinner with family, which was lovely. And then got back to training today. Today is Monday, the race was Saturday, and today I did a lower body session, and my legs actually feel really fresh. So I had a great lower body session this morning. Legs feel great. So I I actually said earlier during the 10K, there was no part where I felt like I was dying. There was no part where I felt like the end I did really speed up and gave it my all. I'd say the last half a K really sent it, really gave it my all, and finished really, really strong. But throughout the race, there was no point where I felt like I was dying, where I felt like I was really fighting too much for it because I was so aware of not burning out and not getting to a point where I couldn't sustain my pace. I just didn't want that to happen. I wanted to have a really positive race experience. So I do think that maybe I could have pushed it a little bit harder if I'd have really given it everything, but it's so hard to judge sometimes in a race. And sometimes it's just a case of doing what you can and then learning from your experience and learning from your data because everyone is so different and learning from feel as well. Like I said, I've learned that on that 10K, on that day, under those conditions, maybe I could have pushed it a little bit harder, but there's always that risk of if you do, you might end up getting to a point where you burn out or you struggle to sustain your pace and you're really fighting for it. But then on the flip side of that, sometimes maybe you have to take it there to learn your own limits. And you never know how you're going to perform on race day. So all you can ever do is give it 100%. But the more data you have, the better. And obviously in your training, you do and I did race pace practice to learn what that felt like and to sort of gauge where my race pace would have been on the day of the race. And you use that data, you learn from that. That's why I went at the pace that I went on the day, but you never truly know what sustaining race pace feels like for the whole distance until race day. And I think that's where doing races really comes in handy to learn where your true limit lies. Because from Saturday, I can look at that and be like, okay, I actually didn't feel like I was truly at my max there. I feel like maybe I could have pushed that a little bit more. Whereas you never truly know that from your training, although it gives you a lot of data and it gives you a really good idea. I don't think I could have pushed it much more. It's a very fine line. You never truly know where your limit lies until you push it on race day and race circumstances. And also, even beyond that, you never truly know what your race circumstances are going to be. You don't know what the weather's going to be like. You don't know what your hormones are going to be like. You don't know how you're going to feel. You don't know how you're going to sleep the night before always. Obviously, there's things you can do to prioritize these things, but you can never fully have control over everything. And it's so important for that reason to focus on giving your 100% given your circumstances rather than, giving yourself a hard time if you don't hit a PB or being too hard on yourself if you don't feel your best or whatever it is. It's just bringing yourself back to as long as I give 100%, that's what matters. There's nothing more that you can do than that. And it's coming back to your why, like, why am I doing this? For me, for example, I I race for enjoyment. I do want to perform well, yes. I do race to monitor my progression, absolutely. But my biggest why is to be fit and healthy and feel good in my own skin year round and to be happy. And so as long as those things are in place, that's what really matters. PBs and progression from a data standpoint, it's just like the icing on the cake. It's not the be all and end all. So I think it's important to come back to your why if you're ever giving yourself a hard time, or you maybe don't have you have a race day that doesn't go quite as you had planned it to. So hopefully that is some helpful food for thought for all of you. And I hope that you've enjoyed listening to my ramblings about my own sort of training over the last few months, experiences and kind of what I've learned and a little bit about my processes and my thoughts. If you have any questions whatsoever, as always, please reach out. I genuinely love hearing from you. It means the world. You can just message me on Instagram. It's Danni Bosworth. That's Danni Bosworth. And I will get back to you as soon as I can. But have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me. It means the world. And I'll see you next week.